come all to a beautiful show. It's gonna be awesome and some other stuff. Dee-dee-dee-dee-doo-dee-dee-doo-dee-dee-doo-dee. Some other musical stuff.
Welcome back to Special Session. I'm your host, Brian Schott, publisher and managing editor of Utah Political Watch. On this week's show, unions busted, more money and more limits for Utah's school voucher program. The Utah Bar Association has some concerns about a few bills. Pride flags, no. Nazi flags, A-OK. And Burgess Owens, country music expert. If you want to keep up with what's happening in Utah politics, take a minute and sign up for my newsletter at utahpoliticalwatch.news. It's free, but if you become a paying subscriber, you get access to my morning news roundup newsletter and the Daily Dispatch, an evening newsletter that wraps up the day on Utah's Capitol Hill. For just $5 a month, you can get those two subscriber-only newsletters, plus you'll be supporting independent political journalism in Utah. Now that that's out of the way, let's get to this week's news. Governor Spencer Cox, late Friday, signed HB 267, which strips public employees in the state of their collective bargaining rights. He signed that bill into law. So as it stands right now, the unions, specifically the Utah Education Association, can no longer bargain on behalf of its members. They didn't bargain on behalf of every teacher. It was up to individual school districts as to whether they could collectively bargain or not. But now there is a ban statewide on that. Utah joins a handful of other states that do not allow public employees to collectively bargain. So what happens going forward? Well, the bill did not pass with a veto-proof majority in both the House and the Senate. And not only does that mean that it was open for a veto, but there is a possibility that there could be a referendum where union members, and they've been talking about this, getting together, gathering enough signatures to put the bill on the 2026 ballot up for a public vote. If a law does not pass with 2/3 in either the House or the Senate, you can launch a referendum. This has happened a couple of times in the past. Back in 2007, the legislature passed a public school vouchers program, and that one, the Utah Education Association organized and got enough signatures to put it on the ballot where it was defeated. Lawmakers didn't try again to pass a voucher program until they passed the Utah Fits All Scholarship, which is a voucher program, a couple of years ago, and we'll get to that in a second. And back in 2019, the legislature passed a sweeping overhaul of the tax system, and they were going to add sales taxes to a number of services. Right now, you don't pay sales tax on some services. They were going to add all services into that, and that drew a lot of opposition from the public. So opponents organized and got a lot of help from the Harmon's grocery chain, who allowed them to collect signatures in the entrance to the stores, and they were able to get enough signatures that it would have gone to the ballot. But lawmakers, the next time they met, repealed the law before that chance because they didn't want to suffer a defeat at the ballot box. So there is a possibility of a referendum. It's really hard to get one of those on the ballot. Organizers will have just 40 days from the day that the legislature ends to collect more than 140,000 signatures statewide, and they also have to hit signature requirements in a number of Utah's counties. I think it's 15 of 29 counties they have to reach signature thresholds in order to put it on the ballot. If they're able to do that, then the law goes on hold until the public can weigh in at the ballot box. That's an extremely difficult thing to do, but union members have been talking about trying to put this up to a public vote. Now, lawmakers will not admit this, but this bill was retribution for some actions taken by the Utah Education Association last year. First of all, they came out against Amendment A, which would have changed the way that public education is funded in the state. Right now, income taxes can only fund public education, higher education, and some social services. And Amendment A would have opened up that constitutional earmark to other parts of the budget. The UEA opposed that, which angered lawmakers. Eventually, that amendment was put on hold because lawmakers didn't notice it properly as per the Constitution. They didn't publish it in a newspaper. And then the teachers union also filed a lawsuit challenging the vouchers program, the Utah Fits All scholarship, saying it's unconstitutional, saying it takes public school money and gives it to private schools. And lawmakers have never, their argument is that lawmakers have never fully funded education as it is. Utah's in the bottom three consistently for per pupil spending among all of the states. They're behind states like Idaho and Mississippi. Some people have been talking about the unions going on strike, and that's a possibility, but it would be extremely rare. Teachers have only gone on strike twice in Utah, and that was for a total of 3 days. Back in 1964, the Utah Education Association went on strike. It was statewide. It was one of the first statewide teacher strikes in the United States, and that was part of a year-long dispute over school funding. Teachers were leaving the state in droves because of low salaries. Half of the teaching positions in the state were being filled by people with little or no qualifications, and school buildings were in disrepair. There were stories around the time of one school building where the roof collapsed in while the students were in class. And so at that time, educators were refusing to sign contracts for the next year. And the National Education Association came out and sanctioned Utah's public education system. And that was to keep teachers from moving here to take jobs because the education system was such a mess, at least from the way that the teachers saw it. During this crisis, the Utah Education Association, they voted to call for a 2-day public school recess. They didn't call it for a strike. They didn't call it a strike, but they called it a recess because then Governor George Clyde refused to call for a special legislative session to appropriate an additional $6 million for school funding. The Utah State Board of Education was against the teacher walkout, but they did walk out for 2 days, and that brought lawmakers and the governor to the table, and they made enough progress that the teachers union a few months later voted to resume contract negotiations. The second time that there was a strike, a statewide strike in the state, was September of 1989, and teachers walked out for 1 day. About 20,000 of the state's teachers walked out of school for 1 day, and they were protesting the legislature using a $38 million budget surplus to pay for tax cuts rather than putting the money towards education. What does that sound like? That sound familiar? You know, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. The 1 day walkout shut down most of the school districts in the state. It affected more than 450,000 students in 800 schools. Norm Bangerter, who was governor at the time, really angered the teachers union because before the walkout, he was quoted as saying that when he gets upset, quote, "I take 2 aspirin and go to work, and that's what teachers should do." And there were protests after that where teachers shook aspirin bottles to mock Bangerter. The background of that 1989 teacher strike is very interesting. In 1987, Bangerter successfully pushed lawmakers to raise taxes by $166 million to better fund public education. And that prompted a big backlash, though. A number of anti-tax measures made it onto the ballot as citizens' initiatives. All of them lost by a large margin in 1988. But Bangerter came really close to losing his re-election bid. It was a 3-way race between him, Democrat Ted Wilson, and independent Merrill Cook, and Bangerter got just over 40% of the vote. So it was really close to not winning another term. And so what happened was after that, lawmakers went on a tax-cutting spree, and they started cutting taxes, and then they got this extra money, and instead of putting it towards education like the teachers wanted, they paid for a tax cut. There was almost one other strike. In 1990, teachers came very close to a statewide strike, but they backed off after lawmakers at the last minute approved some increases for education funding, which included a $1,000 pay raise for teachers and a 4% increase in per pupil funding. So it's happened in Utah. It's very rare for teachers to go on strike, but it's happened here in the state. Recent teacher strikes have been pretty effective. There was a study of nearly 800 teachers teacher strikes between 2007 and 2023, and all of those shows that they led to some significant gains for educators. That's where we're at. So teachers and police officers, firefighters, other public employees no longer have the ability to collectively bargain for contracts and benefits because Governor Spencer Cox signed HB 267. Not sure what the path forward is, but history shows that it's very hard to get a referendum on the ballot. And teacher strikes did send a message, but it's only happened twice. Speaking of the school vouchers program, the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program, Representative Candace Perucci, who was the sponsor of the original bill 2 years ago when lawmakers passed it, she is looking to now put some curbs or at least some guardrails around the program after it's been in effect for 1 year. What this program does is it gives parents who want to take their kids out of public school, it gives them $8,000 per year. That they can put towards private school tuition, homeschooling expenses, even some activities like ski passes. Yeah, you can buy ski passes currently under the Utah Fits All Scholarship. That $8,000 that parents are given under the program, that's almost twice as much as Utah spends per pupil with the weighted pupil unit. That's when you hear WPU, that means the per pupil spending. That's almost twice as much as Utah spends on kids who are in public school. So this was established in 2023. They initially funded it at like $42 million. Last year, they doubled that amount, even though the program hadn't been in effect yet, hadn't even started yet. They doubled that to $82 million. And Perucci was asking for another $80 million this year to double the funding again. But last week, the Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee only recommended $40 million of new funding. So if that passes, the total funding for the program would be $122 million. But anyway, back to Perucci's bill, HB 455. And what this does is it's sort of putting more guardrails around the program. Right now, it is administered by an outside organization called the Alliance for Choice in Education, ACE. What Perucci's bill does is it transfers oversight of the program to a newly created position called Financial Administrator. It's going to be part of the State Board of Education's Department of Operations, but it's going to now be housed within the State Board of Education rather than an autonomous organization. Perucci also wants to put some revisions on what this money can be used on. Right now, as I said, you can buy ski passes. You can't buy a season pass. You can't buy a pass for the whole season, but you can do like day passes. And they were also allowing what are called chaperone expenses. So if a parent wanted to take their child skiing, they could buy the child ski pass using these public education funds and then pay for their own because they were the chaperone. What Perucci's trying to do is she's changing that. No longer could you buy ski passes or lift tickets or tickets for entertainment events, and you cannot use this money to pay for chaperone expenses. So if a parent wants to go, they're on their own. They're also going to put some limits on how much of that money can go towards something. Under Perucci's bill, only 20% of the total scholarship amount could be put towards extracurricular activities. And then there's another category called physical education experiences. That means like fitness centers, golf clubs, gymnastics, rock climbing. You could only use another 20% of the funds for that. And you can see all the things that are currently permitted under the program if you go to the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program. I linked it in my story at utahpoliticalwatch.news. So with 20% of the scholarship money being able to go towards extracurricular activities and another 20% towards physical education experiences, that's $3,200 a year out of the $8,000 that families get per child if they're approved for the program that can go to those things. So that's a lot of money, a lot of your tax money that's supposed to go to public education. In fact, that $3,200 is just about $1,000 less than what the state spends on each student in public school. And that money right now can go, or at least under Perucci's bill, that money could go towards physical education and extracurricular activities. In the first year of the program, about 27,000 people applied, but only about a third got scholarships. And a significant number of those those went to people who are homeschooling their kids. So again, your tax dollars at work, money that's supposed to go to public education, going to homeschool students who don't want anything to do with public education, but they're happy to take your tax dollars to support that. And there was a great story, Channel 2 looked into it, and they found that a number of the people who applied didn't get the full $8,000 anyway. They only got a portion of that money. Bottom line, they're asking for more money for this program that could boost the funding up to $122 million per year if this proposed $40 million boost goes through. But they want to dial back on what that money can be used for because, it's not a good look when they're taking taxpayer money and paying for ski passes. So I told you earlier about how the Republicans are mad at the Utah Education Association because of the Amendment A and the lawsuit against the vouchers program. Well, they're also mad at judges who had the gall to rule against them in the Amendment A case, the Amendment D case, the gerrymandering case, which a judge could rule on anytime. The judge is also expected to rule anytime on the suit against the private school vouchers program. So there have been a number of bills up on the Hill that take specific aim at the judiciary. So earlier this week, the Utah Bar Association sent out letters to their members asking them to contact lawmakers about several pieces of legislation that they say could be unconstitutional because, quote, they undermine the fundamental principle of the separation of powers. This letter listed 5 bills. There was SB 203 and SB 204. Both of those are from Senator Brady Brammer. SB 203 limits who would have standing to bring a lawsuit. The letter says this changes the long-standing common law principles of standing. And I've talked about this bill before. What it does is it says that someone can only sue on behalf of another person if there is, if that person is also harmed by whatever law the legislature passed. And it also says that associations can only sue on behalf of their members if that association either has a legal relationship with those people or if they are also harmed. And S. Bill 204 gives the government the ability to appeal a court ruling that a law is unconstitutional directly to the Utah Supreme Court. They don't have to go through the normal appeals process. If it's in the Utah District Court, they won't have to go through the Utah Court of Appeals and then the Supreme Court. This bill says the government can appeal directly to the Utah Supreme Court and that the law would remain in effect during that appeal instead of putting it on hold. And this is widely seen as a reaction to the court putting Utah's abortion trigger ban law on hold after the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Planned Parenthood sued on behalf of some of their clients to challenge the constitutionality of that law, which is a near total abortion ban. And so that law is on hold. Well, SB 204 flips that around. Brammer has a couple of other bills that they are concerned about. SB 154 and SJR 4. Both of those give legislative auditors the authority to require someone to give them information that right now would be subject to attorney-client privilege. So those two bills from Brammer would require someone to break attorney-client privilege and give information to legislative auditors. Another bill, HB 451 from Representative Jason Kyle, that raises the percentage that a judge must get at the ballot box when you see those judicial retention elections. Right now, it's 50% plus 1 for a judge to stay in their job. He would raise that threshold to 67%. The Bar Association says, quote, this increased percentage vote would be the highest in the nation. Its extremely high threshold would make it difficult to attract and retain qualified judges, and it allows outside and special interests to campaign against judges when they only have to convince a third of the populace to vote against a judge. So the Bar Association is concerned about those bills. There's probably another bill that will get their attention as well because House Majority leader Jefferson Moss, he opened a bill file last week that could lead to expanding the Utah Supreme Court. Right now, it's got 5 justices, and he's talking about adding more to it. Why? Well, the Utah Supreme Court ruled that the legislature overstepped its bounds when they gutted the anti-gerrymandering proposition, Prop 4, after it was passed at the ballot box in 2018. So expanding the court, at least the Republican-controlled legislature sees that as a way to get rid of activist judges. And I'm guessing that that is the impetus behind this bill from Representative Moss, and I'm sure that the Bar Association might have some thoughts on that one as well. Republican Representative Trevor Lee says that displaying a pride flag in a public classroom or in a government building is too divisive. It causes divisive ideologies to make their way into government, and it pulls people apart. So his HB 77, which passed through a committee this week, would only allow an approved list of flags to be displayed in schools and at government buildings. What flags are allowed? Well, here's the list, according to Representative Lee.
A couple clarifications with this as it pertains to the K through 12. There are instances where in classrooms you have curriculum that is needed to use of flags, such as World War II, Civil War. You may have a Nazi flag, you may have a Confederate flag. And so you are allowed to display those flags for the purpose of those lesson plans. So if it's part of the curriculum, then that is okay.
So, under Lee's bill, a rainbow pride flag is too divisive, but a Nazi flag would be just fine. Black Lives Matter, way too divisive. Confederate flag, just fine. Now, it must be said that a Nazi flag or a Confederate flag must be part of an approved school curriculum, but you can't get around the fact that under Lee's proposed legislation, a Nazi flag would not be seen as divisive, but a pride flag would. A Confederate flag, not controversial at all. Black Lives Matter flag, absolutely not allowed. Lee has watered down his proposal just a little bit. The original version would have allowed a parent to actually go to court if there was a pride flag or some other politically themed flag that they disapproved of in a classroom. That would be if they informed the school district that the flag was there and the district didn't do anything to rectify the situation. They passed an amendment in committee this week that took that part of it out, but he did expand it from classrooms to cover all government buildings. I was really struck by part of the debate during the public testimony around this bill. Lee was asked by Representative Carol Moss if there were specific examples of this happening, and Lee was 100% confident that it was.
Is this happening in schools? I mean, my daughter teaches high school. I know a lot of teachers, but I mean, is this a bill to say, in case any teacher puts a pride flag or trans flag up, then we're going to make sure that it's illegal. But is this happening? I don't even know. I don't even hear about it. I don't know teachers putting these flags in their rooms.
Yeah, it's definitely happening.
I mean, you've heard specific examples?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just say, are they in high school or elementary?
From
where?
most of the examples that I've had from parents that have come to me, concern has been within the high school realm, but it even has gone all the way down into elementary schools that we've seen and had problems with it.
I really wish Representative Moss would have followed up and asked for specific examples, because they just kind of let it go that Lee says, oh, yeah, sure, it's happening. It's absolutely happening. And that's where a lot of this debate comes around. It's a lot of conjecture. It's a lot of anecdotal evidence. My brothers, sisters, cousins, mailman saw this happen, that sort of thing. But that's used as concrete evidence that this is an urgent problem that needs to be addressed. Lawmakers tried this last year. Former Representative Kara Birkeland had a bill in the early part of the session that specifically banned pride flags. It mentioned it in the legislation, and that would just seem to be a bridge too far for lawmakers. That bill didn't go anywhere. I think there were some significant constitutional concerns around it. But then on the final night of the 2024 session, in the final hours of the session, they tried it again. They tried to sneak through a bill very similar to what Lee has proposed here. I remember sitting in the Senate with just a couple of hours to go before the end of the session, and one of Birkeland's bills was on the board up for final passage. Originally, Birkeland's bill was supposed to provide some guidelines as to how to deal with public school employees who are the subject of a criminal investigation. Her proposed legislation would have suspended them without pay until the investigation was over. But she and Senator Dan McKay conspired to strip that out of the bill. They stripped all of that out of the bill and then put in essentially a pride flag ban. It was a list of approved flags that could be shown in public schools. This was something they were trying to sneak through with just an hour or two to go before the end of the session. I remember Utah Eagle Forum President Gail Ruzicka came into the Senate gallery, which was my clue that something was up, and they tried to resurrect this pride flag ban. There just wasn't enough appetite for lawmakers to do this at the last minute. They weren't going to take this step because the bill hadn't been through a committee hearing. They were trying to substitute it at the last possible second before sending it back to the House, and they just couldn't get enough votes in the Senate to make this happen. So it's back again this year. So after passing out of committee, that bill's heading to the full House for a vote where they get to weigh in on whether they think pride flags and Black Lives Matter are more divisive than Nazi flags and Confederate flags. There's one bill that was introduced last week that I was very interested in, and it comes from Representative Ryan Wilcox. It's HB 474. So normally what happens when the legislature passes a law to regulate a business, that's up to state agencies to implement rules, or to come up with a rule to implement these new regulations. And what Wilcox's bill does is it says if a state agency implements a new rule or comes up with a new rule because the legislature passed a law, but that rule cannot have a fiscal impact of more than $1 million on a single business or a single person over a 5-year span. So say there's a new pollution control measure that a state agency wants to implement. If one business or one person can say, this is going to cost me more than $1 million over 5 years, $200,000 a year to come into compliance with this, well, then the state agency cannot implement that rule. They have to go back to the drawing board. But the bill also allows individuals to challenge professional licensing regulations. So anyone can petition the Utah Office of Professional Licensure Review. This is a new agency that was created when Governor Cox was elected for his first term, and their job is to go through and look at all of the licensure requirements for every profession that is subject to a license and determine whether or not the regulations for that business or that license need to stay in place or if they could do something less onerous. Well, this would allow any person to petition that body to repeal or modify a licensing regulation. So if you don't like a regulation for your license, if you're required to get a license to do business in the state for your profession, say you are a nail technician or say that you are a life coach and you're required to get a license and you don't like some of the regulations, well, you can petition the Office of Professional Licensure Review and say this either needs to be repealed or you need to do something that isn't so hard to comply with. Once a petition is submitted, the office has 90 days to either repeal the rule or justify why it should stay in place, or they can modify it to reduce the burden on people who have to get the license. But if the petitioner doesn't like that decision, say they come back and say the rule needs to stay in place, or we're going to tweak it slightly, but we're not going to get rid of it. Well, it creates a path for petitioners to go to court and then challenge it if they disagree with the result. A little bit of background that is probably helpful. This is very similar to some of the things that Senator Mike Lee has been trying to do on the federal level with trying to rein in federal regulations, which has been a long-time complaint of his. And Wilcox was in the legislature and then left to go work in Lee's office. And then when he came back, he got reelected to the legislature. So there's a lot of influence from Senator Mike Lee in this bill. I'm going to need you to take a minute and listen to this clip from Representative Burgess Owens. Last week, he was asked by some right-wing YouTube person about Beyonce winning the Grammy for Best Country Album for her album Cowboy Carter. And Burgess Owens, well, he was not a fan of that decision because, just listen.
So country music is so popular in Utah. What was your take on Beyonce winning Best Country Album at the Grammys?
I think that's the closest thing to DEI we're going to see right now. I mean, I'm not a country fan, but I can tell from the response from country fans, they did not appreciate that at all. You put all that hard work, you develop your fan base, you go out there and you work to develop a reputation, and all of a sudden somebody comes out of the blue because she's popular in something else, and she gets the best. Nobody respects that, and unfortunately, because of that, Beyonce will not be respected by that core group of people that she is now singing to.
So Owen thinks the only reason that Beyonce won this award is that because she was popular because of the previous music that she had created, and she decided to go into country music, and because of that popularity elsewhere, she just waltzed in and won this Grammy over other people who may be more deserving or have spent their entire life working on country music, and she just waltzes in because of her popularity. Burgess Owens, his claim to fame before he was elected to Congress was that he played in the NFL in the 70s and 80s. He won a Super Bowl in 1981 with the Oakland Raiders over the Philadelphia Eagles. And Burgess Owens will not let you forget the fact that he won a Super Bowl. I've seen this in public. He aggressively urges people to wear his Super Bowl ring. It goes with him everywhere. And anybody that he takes a picture with, I've seen him shove this Super Bowl ring onto their finger because he was able to parlay his popularity in the NFL as an NFL player into a seat in Congress. Because if you look at what happened between the NFL and Congress, it was pretty unremarkable. He had a number of failed businesses. He declared bankruptcy a number of times. He started a charity that investigation after investigation shows it really didn't do anything. It raised some money, but a lot of money didn't go to what it was supposed to. And then he came to Utah, where he has really no ties to the state other than the fact that he's a member of the LDS Church. And then he got elected to Congress. So it's really interesting that Owens would slam Beyonce for winning an award in something she had not done before because of her popularity in another venue, another field. It's really fascinating that he would be upset about that, especially in light of his career up to the time that he was elected to Congress. And the rest of the clip, I don't know. He says that this sort of thing is the reason why Donald Trump got elected, because he wanted to restore fairness, and there's some DEI thing. I don't know. Listen.
You think it diminishes her respect overall?
I think it diminishes her. I think it diminishes the awards, and I think you have a lot more people. You have a lot less people watching as time goes on when they don't realize it's fair. Fairness is what our country is all about. That's why we're so excited about what President Trump did with protecting women from men. We do not like unfairness. If we see that, we turn away, we go another way. And I think Beyonce and the Grammys, or whatever the Grammys I think it was, they're going to suffer long term because of it.
At this point, I would like to raise a practical question. Do you think that Beyonce even has the slightest idea who Owens is? There's a lot more that we could talk about, but we're going to have to leave it there for this week. Thank you so much for listening. If you have not subscribed to this podcast yet, maybe somebody forwarded it to you, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, well, maybe leave a rating and review wherever you get those podcasts. That helps the algorithm suggest the show to new listeners and helps us grow our audience. If there's a topic you would like me to tackle, or maybe a guest you'd like to hear from, reach out and let me know. You can find my email on the website, utahpoliticalwatch.news, or you can find me on social media. I'm on most of the Nazi-free platforms: Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And if you haven't yet, I'd like to encourage you to sign up for my newsletter for free at utahpoliticalwatch.news. You'll get all of my coverage of the 2025 Utah legislature in your inbox, and you can also become a paying subscriber if you feel so inclined. decline, because these podcasts, my coverage of the legislature as an independent journalist, all of that takes time and it takes resources, and I really can't do it for free. So if you feel like you can swing it for as little as $5 a month, or maybe just a one-time donation, that will help support this critical work of holding our elected officials accountable. You can find that on my website, utahpoliticalwatch.news. I'd appreciate it if you could take that extra step. I completely understand that not everybody can afford a paid subscription right now, but if you can, I and other readers and listeners would be extremely grateful that you support independent journalism here in Utah. Special Session with Brian Schott is written and produced by me, Brian Schott. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.